The wind that breathed over Winterfell in the first true spring since the breaking of the wheel was neither warm nor gentle. It carried the raw scent of thawing earth and distant wood smoke, the mingled promise and peril of change. Its slow exhalation rattled the empty crenellations where banners had once snapped like quick tongues. The direwolf still flew, aged linen now, mended twice, threads faded to a dusky gray, but the direwolf no longer signified unquestioned rule. Instead, it hovered as a memory, an emblem of a house asked to shepherd more than itself. Inside the great hall, the shadows stretched long, as though reluctant to surrender their winter dominion. Between tall candle clocks, a soft hush had settled, a hush strange to a room that had for generations echoed with boisterous feasts and the clangor of armor. Sansa Stark kept her seat at the center of the long high table, her posture straight yet unhurried, hands clasped loosely upon the carved arms. Her eyes traced the knots in the oak boards where the new benches had been fitted. Her aunt's southern carpenters had left neat joinery but no northern soul. She wondered whether the wood itself felt foreign, whether trees mourned their uprooting. Outside, timber wrights raised scaffolds around the west wall to repair the damage of a war no mason cared to recount aloud. That too unsettled her. How tirelessly people worked to erase a scar, even as their memories continued to itch under the bandage. Sansa listened to Lord Glover describing the scant stores of barley remaining in Deepwood Motte. His voice creaked like a door kept from full opening by swelling boards. He spoke of last year's failed plantings, of salt carried ashore by storms so fierce the shoreline oaks leaned inland permanently. When he finished, he waited for a verdict. Sansa could grant grain from Wintertown's surpluses, but supplies had grown thin there too. She could levy new rents in silver, yet coin made mouths no fuller. The hall expected a decisive word. Whether from a queen or a steward they scarcely cared, so long as the words answered hunger. And Sansa found herself wondering why one mouth alone must shape fate for so many. Seed must travel before it can take root, she said finally. Her voice, low and measured, filled the hall like rising water, and every lordling leaned closer to keep their boots dry. I will release half of Winterfell's remaining barley to Deepwood Motte at sowing time. The remainder I lend in trust. Next harvest we tally what was returned in field and in flower. If your barns overflow, we share. If drought or a storm ruins you, the debt rests upon Winterfell's shoulders. A murmur fluttered through the benches. Relief perhaps, yet also surprise, that she risked depleting her own bins for an uncertain promise. Glover bowed stiffly, but his eyes brimmed. Sansa felt an ache behind her sternum. It was not pride, but a yearning, as though every act of mercy widened some invisible door others kept kicking shut. She dismissed the council for a midday respite. The hall vacated in a scrape of benches and gratefully muttered courtesies. Only Maester Conlon lingered, not for advice, but because he moved with the careful steps of a man whose joints had forgotten lubricant. He smiled at her, the sort of smile reserved for patient students. "You barter community, my lady," he said as she walked into the side door. "A rare coin. What choice is left me?" she asked. "More than you fear, perhaps. But each choice breeds daughters. Best to name them early." His riddles had once charmed her. Today, they weighted her lids. Outside, the courtyard rang with hammer blows on anvils, a rhythmic argument of steel with itself. Sansa crossed the yard to the broken gardens. Snowbanks shrank between the warmed stones, revealing patches of sodden soil. Insects crawled confused under weak sunlight. How swiftly seasons shed disguises. She breathed in the damp and closed her eyes. Footfalls whispered behind her, quicker, lighter than any man-at-arms. When she turned, Arya stood a dozen paces away, hair tangled by travel, cheeks flushed by cold and long rides. She wore plain brown leathers that made her seem a wandering girl rather than a woman whose name carried distant rumors. Over her shoulder she carried a roll of sailcloth instead of a sword. Her gray eyes glittered, as though laughter awaited only the right spark. "I arrived at the gate before dawn," Arya said. "Thought I'd let you finish your lordly business before showing my shadow." "You were always my shadow," Sansa replied, and for an instant they were both children again, sneaking unseen through mother's rose bushes. She stepped forward but hesitated. unsure whether to greet a returning sister or a storm. Arya bridged the doubt and hugged her fiercely. The pressure of her arms spoke of seas crossed and thoughts harbored like contraband. When they parted, Arya unrolled the sailcloth at their feet. A map, but no maester's hand had drawn it. The ink bled in irregular strokes, lines traced by someone unused to quills yet driven by purpose. Sansa squatted, skirts gathering dew, and traced a finger along the shapes. The north looked familiar, but rivers snaked in new directions. Mountains rose where none should. Names littered the wilds. Guest houses, market towns, forges. Places she had never approved nor taxed. "You charted these?" she asked. Arya nodded. "I followed the old king's road even after it lost the name. Villages sprouted along the hedges, freeholds no lord visits. They speak your praises, yet pay no tithe. They trade with one another, not castles. They decide disputes in circle gatherings. A different north, sister, thriving while you hold torn banners." Her words did not accuse, yet Sansa felt the sting of judgment. She glimpsed an entire realm grown beneath her feet like mycelium, invisible to the lofty. A realm neither crippled nor nurtured by the ways of great houses. "I do not rule by neglect," Sansa said quietly. "No," Arya agreed. "But you rule from above, still. They live side by side. I thought you should see them." She tapped the map where a crooked river met a trade town labeled Barrow's Bend. "They speak of common councils there. Each household sends a voice. No lord commands them. They vote at midsummer. Choose reeves, share grain across feasts. Their barns are full, though their shields bear no sigils." Sansa looked up. The courtyard's commotion carried on indifferent to the revelation. Guards laughed, nails bitten from planks, ravens croaked from creaking cages. How many secrets bloom because no high-born eye stoops to notice? "Walk with me," she said. They spent the afternoon roaming Winterfell's walls. Arya recounted her journey, down the White Knife by boat, across the Bight on a fishing catch, through Carhold's burnt fields where new saplings rose from ash. She described moot fires in hill camps where wildlings haggled with farmers, salt for oats, axes for butter. She told of children who knew no king, only the faces of women who spoke plain truths at dusk assemblies. "These gatherings, do they keep order?" Sansa asked, testing the edges of possibility. "They keep each other," Arya replied. "When a wolf steals sheep, they track it together. When a child is born, 3 villages send midwives. If a man harms another, he stands before the circle and the eldest women decide reparations. Some fates harsher than courts, but none unsaid behind doors." The horizon glared white where snow lingered. Sansa thought of the great hall's hush. The burden of each decision pressed upon her like chainmail too big for her shoulders. She thought of children mending nets instead of bending knee. And she felt a tremor, fear or exhilaration she could not tell. That night she convened only a modest supper, inviting Arya, Maester Conlon, and 2 stewards. Fires crackled low. Spiced carrot broth steamed in small wooden bowls. The conversation drifted from harvest predictions to travelers' tales, until Arya placed her map upon the table. The Maester adjusted a dim lantern to scrutinize it, eyebrows climbing like ravens from a rookery. "Self-governing commons," he murmured. "Such models thrive in Braavos among freeholders. Rare amid feudal snows." "Not rare," Arya corrected. "Unseen." She traced the inked circles marking moot sites. "It spreads." Sansa watched Conlon's gaze flick to her, gauging her pulse. He began recounting histories of the Vale's mountain clans, who elected chiefs, of the first men's Hillfort councils before the Starks. The old Maester, she realized, had kept such lore within reach, awaiting the right hearth to retell it. When the bowl stood empty, Arya withdrew a small leather pouch. From it, she poured several round tokens onto the table. Flat river stones smoothed and painted with small sigils. A tree, a bear, a corn sheaf, a loom. "Voting tokens," she explained. "Each craft marks its own. When the circle decides, every adult drops a stone in one of 2 baskets. Majority carries. Neor. Sansa reached for the token bearing a loom. The paint shone faintly bronze in firelight. She pictured a gathering in a frost-cleared field, farmers wrapped in furs, raising voices over grain tithes. The thought stirred her, less a challenge to authority than a chorus. After the others departed, Sansa and Arya lingered by the dying fire. Sansa spoke quietly, almost to the flames. "Do you dream of home at sea?" she asked. "I dream of not needing to run," Arya said. "The sea is wide, but it's also borderless. Here, lines are drawn everywhere. Rivers, walls, names. Yet if people can choose their lines, maybe the borders move with them." Sansa looked at her sister. The once restless girl somehow calm upon return. Not from weariness but from witnessing something freer. Sansa sighed, hearing in herself the creak of an old door unlatched for the first time. "One step," she whispered. "One step toward what you've seen. Show me where to begin." A week later, a small host rode from Winterfell. Sansa, Arya behind her, Maester Conlon, Podrick Payne acting as shield, and 10 guards clad in muted gray cloaks without heraldry. They kept their banners furled, traveling as a delegation rather than procession. They took the snow-melt road west toward Barrow's Bend, Arya guiding them through pine stands the color of midnight. Every village they passed offered food or mended tack, not out of fealty, but out of neighborly law. Sansa insisted on leaving coin each night. Arya hung back, watching what price kindness accepted. On the third dusk they arrived at Barrow's Bend. A low hill ringed with thatch roofs overlooked a bend of the shivering shore river. Smoke rose from stone chimneys. Wooden quay posts jutted into the current where flat-bottomed boats bobbed. No walls, no guard towers, but lanterns lined each path, marking safety for strangers. A horn did not sound their entrance. Instead, a young woman chewing willow bark looked up from stacking fish traps and waved. "Circle meets at moonrise," she said. "If that's what you seek." Her tone carried curiosity alone, no deference. They lodged in an attic above the cooper's shop. The air smelled of pitch and new oak. At moonrise, Sansa wrapped herself in a plain wool cloak and followed the lantern trail to the meeting circle. It lay inside a hollow, earthen tiers shaped by shovel and foot over seasons of debate. Torches ringed the rim. On the center dais stood 2 baskets and a split cedar table. People filed in. Fishermen, furriers, a gray-bearded woman with herding dogs, children who sat quiet upon stones. When Sansa took a seat along the outer tier, no whisper of recognition spread. To them, she was only another traveler come to watch. An elder named Harl the Tanner opened the moot with a simple call for matters of the day. 3 petitions arose: whether to extend the fishing ban upriver until the sturgeon returned, how to divide cracked millstones among distant hamlets, and whether to cut a new trail through moss-wet woods to shorten the road east. Arguments followed, sharp but respectful. Each speaker addressed the crowd, not a dais of lords. When at last, Harl signaled vote, baskets were passed. Stones clinked. Children tallied aloud. Trusting ears enforced honesty. Decisions recorded on birch bark. The meeting dismissed before the moon had climbed a hand's breadth higher. Sansa felt a tremor stilling in her chest. The mingled voices had sounded like a river of thought, swift and certain. She noticed how the losing sides did not grumble, but helped carry the torches away. In that cooperation lay a glue stronger than decree. She waited until most folk dispersed, then approached Harl. Arya lingered behind. She lowered her hood. Harl's eyes widened recognition, not alarm, but consideration, as though the possibility of meeting her had occurred before. He bowed only his head. "My Lady Stark," he said. "We serve broth at Claypot House if you'd sit." They shared a long table with bowls of carrot parsnip stew. Steam fogged the window. Harl spoke plainly of the circle's years. How after the Bolton's fall no tax collectors came, so the villages learned to solve quarrels themselves. How they still sent surplus grain to Winterfell tithe barns, but no ravens returned. How they preferred voice to chains. Sansa listened, soup cooling. She asked about crime, about intervillage feuds, about childbirth and burial, the mundane functions of any polity. Harl answered with measured detail. At last she said, "Would you trust such circles joined across the whole north?" Harl chuckled softly. "Trust? We already trade decisions with salt pans and Otterbridge. One sends seed wheat, one felled oak. We adopt each other's winter rules. The trust was forged before you named it." Arya watched her sister's face as though reading shifting constellations. When they returned to their attic lodging, the moon cast long silver bars across the wooden floor. Sansa sat upon her cot and drew a deep breath. "I thought the north sickened. Yet it breathes," she murmured. "It breathes," Arya agreed. "But lungs tire. They need structure, else grow ragged." They spoke late into the night, of federated circles, of a council chosen by the commons, of House Stark offering guidance, not commandments. Sansa realized how revolutionary proposals could sound if shouted from castle walls. Yet here, whispered over worn blankets, they seemed as natural as the next season. At dawn they departed Barrow's Bend with a modest escort of locals, who insisted on guiding them east along the proposed new trail. They stopped at cottages to taste lake perch, to inspect cradle planks carved in communal yards. Sansa took notes, names, crafts, promises of help. When they reached the mouth of the King's Road 8 days later, their party had doubled. Potters bent on offering kiln spaces, lumbermen eager to plan roadworks, a septa who wished to carry news to remote shrines. No one asked where they would be paid. They asked only when assembly would be called. Back in Winterfell, Lord Glover awaited with petitions and worries about raiders along the stony shore. He braced for rulings. Instead, Sansa summoned not her small council, but every master and matron of the keep. In the courtyard, she stood upon a wagon tongue. Workers paused. Children perched on stone troughs. Arya waited at her side. The sun cut between towers, bright yet cold. Sansa spoke with a voice clear as the wind that carried it. She told of the circles, of decisions made by many, rather than the burdened neck of one. She spoke of a republic, though she avoided the southern word that might scald old loyalties. She asked whether those gathered would meet in 1 month's time, at midsummer, to send chosen voices from every steading and holdfast. Some gasped, some frowned, yet none walked away, for they had already seen winter's tyranny and knew what it cost. When she finished, she did not proclaim. She asked, "Who agrees that voice belongs to every hearth?" She said, and raised the loom token Arya had given her. A hush, then movement. A blacksmith lifted an old nail. The baker raised a wooden spoon. A guardsman held his scabbard, empty of sword. One by one, hands filled the air, not to pledge fealty, but to answer a call. Arya smiled, something fierce and tender at once. Sansa exhaled, and for the first time since childhood, felt the weight of Winterfell shift from a crown upon her brow to a mantle across many shoulders. The month that followed was neither swift nor smooth. Ravens flew south and east, bearing letters free of seals, for any hand might open them. Maester Conlan drafted the letters, each beginning with the same stark line. "The North calls its people to speak." He instructed Ravencoats to copy them verbatim, resisting any lord's temptation to append his own flourish. Around Winterfell, carpenters erected a long pavilion of pine beams and linen roofs in the Godswood's wide meadow, wide enough to seat 200, though none could guess how many would come. Scribes hammered benches. Seamstresses embroidered rows of empty circles on broad cloths. Conlan intended to ink each circle with a village mark on the day, creating a living map of attendance. Within castle walls, debates bloomed like nettles in alleys. Lord Serwyn feared an uprising should farmers taste too much freedom. Lady Mormont, newly come of age but stern as sea salt, argued that the Bear Islands already practiced communal oaths. The Glover men fretted over the defense levy. Who would man the garrisons if every holdfast taxed itself? Sansa listened, asked questions, refused to decree. Gradually, the argument shifted from whether to how. Arya, meanwhile, rode daily patrols beyond the walls, escorting new delegations arriving. She guided them to billet in outer courtyards, mixing hill tribe herders with white-cloaked Septon brothers, fisherfolk beside disbanded Sellswards, turned coopers. She practiced no hierarchy, and so none formed. Nights by the hearths, she told quiet stories of the free cities where elected magistrates balanced power. People listened, some skeptical yet curious, as though shown a map of a coastline they might one day reach. 3 days before midsummer, a surprise envoy approached. Men in crimson cloaks bearing the Rose of Highgarden no more, but the golden lantern of the Reach's new regents. They requested audience, citing trade ties, grain for wool, wine for ironwood. Sansa received them without pomp. Over tinted glass goblets, they inquired whether the North truly meant to forsake noble succession. She parried with queries about harvest shipments delayed by river tolls. The conversation danced, neither side revealing full intent. Yet the envoys departed with glimpses of a North, perhaps unpredictable, but open to bargains beyond bloodlines. On the eve before the assembly, Sansa walked alone to the crypts. She carried no torch. Moonlight filtered through broken stonework, glinting upon the rusty hilts of sculpted swords. She stopped before the statue of her father. The years had worn Ned Stark's likeness until moss filled the weathered grooves. She touched his stone hand. "I will try to be just," she whispered, "but not by your measure alone." In the silence she fancied the cold stone warmed fractionally, like breath on iron. She bowed her head, then climbed back to the surface, where dawn already bled pale. Midsummer day arrived clear and temperate, a gift rarely granted the North. From dawn until late morning, carriages and pack mules poured through Winterfell's gates. Each entrant carried a token, carved wood, dyed thread, polished shells, to mark their village during votes. At the pavilion, rings of benches filled. Maester Conlon took the dais, quill poised above parchment wedded to a wide ledger. Beside him sat Sansa, not upon a throne but a plain ash chair identical to those flanking it. Arya occupied the chair to her left, a restless grin playing. The first order of business. Recognize voices. Conlon called each delegation's name. A representative stood, announced craft and village, placed their token upon the cloth map. By midday the blank linen bloomed with color, wool embroideries from the rills, cedar discs from the neck, pieces of obsidian chipped on skagos. Even White Harbor's dock guild had sent 2 fishermen in place of Lord Manderley's absent kin, citing that the sea gave them voice enough. When the final token settled, Conlon counted 191 voices present. A hush lingered. No gathering in northern memory had united such disparate folk. Conlon proposed articles for discussion: harvest levy, border defense, road upkeep, adjudication of major crimes, and succession of leadership. Each item would be debated, then voted by stone tokens. No separate chambers for highborn and small folk. Each voice weighed equal. The boldness of that equality filled the pavilion with a tang of cedar and risk. Yet the first debates unfolded orderly, even dull at times. How many bushels per household to tithe for winter stores? Whether blacksmith guilds should supply standardized plowshares across the territory. Sansa watched, heart thrumming behind still demeanor. She spoke seldom, offering clarifications when asked. The only heated moment came when a leather-hatted trapper argued that road upkeep feared storms less than river barges did. A White Harbor mariner retorted that roads invited bandits, whereas waterborne cargoes knew no brigands afloat. The dispute ended with laughter when a septa suggested building both and praying for mild weather. Near sunset, Conlon announced the final article. The form of governance. Should leadership rotate yearly among elected stewards? Should there remain a high protector with limited powers? Should House Stark retain ceremonial guardianship? Suddenly the pavilion vibrated with murmurs, as though every preceding matter had been opening act to this. Sansa felt Arya glance sideways, measuring tension. Voices rose. A mason from Long Lake insisted a central figure could unify armies if wildlings or Southrons pressed. A shepherd woman argued that no one should hold power long enough to brand it. A white-haired scribe proposed dual consuls mirroring ancient Andal republics. Debate whirled like leaves in a courtyard gale. Sansa waited, hearing the melody of contention but sensing its missing harmony. Then Arya stood. She did not climb the dais. She stayed among the benches. Her voice was low but carried. Why fear name or title? Power flows where trust follows. Trust follows deeds witnessed. The crowd quieted. My sister never sought to hoard bread. She opens barns. She listens when huntsmen plead, when orphans mutter. She stood before a queen's dragon and spoke mercy. If you doubt her hunger for justice, recall she stands here unarmed among all of you. Arya turned to Sansa, eyes soft. Yet even she should not rule untested. She faced the crowd once more. Let the Republic, if Republic you birth, choose 2 consuls. One to mine the hearth and harvest, one to patrol the borders and roads. Terms of 3 years, no consecutive re-election. Let the Circle elect them, then bind them to law sworn today. If either fails, the Circle may recall by majority at midsummer. I nominate Sansa Stark for the first Hearth Consul, for her wisdom and her measured flame, as for the rod choose. She smiled, self-mocking, but her gray eyes shone unwavering. A ripple of laughter. Then the scribe who recalled Andal tales rose. I name Arya Stark for Road Consul. Any who have walked with her know she steps lightly but sees far. Before Sansa could react, tokens began to clink. Voting stones passed hand to hand, baskets circulating. Maester Conlon called for order, but the tide already ran. Endless hands dropped markers. Shells, carved bones, shards of colored glass. Others whispered alternate names. Tormund Giantsbane, the Bear Islands' young Lyanna, a quiet beekeeper from the Barrowlands. But the momentum bore 2 currents, and most stones landed accordingly. Conlon tallied under lantern light. 137 voices for Sansa as Hearth Consul. 109 for Arya as Road Consul. The next highest tally barely 40. When he announced the counts, a hush hung poised like swords unsheathed but pointed downward. In respect, not menace. Sansa stood slowly. Her chest felt both light and fraught, as if an invisible crown had dissolved into air she could not help but breathe. I accept, she said, not as ruler but as servant. She looked at the myriad tokens before her. You have bound my hands with trust, so bind them tightly. Remind me each day whom I serve, and remind my sister likewise when her boots carry her to far borders. Arya grinned and gave a half bow to the pavilion. Cheers erupted, ragged at first then full-throated, echoing beneath the linen roofing like thunder captured in cloth. Night draped the godswood. Torches guided revelers toward Wintertown where brewers tapped reserved casks. Sansa slipped away along a mossy path toward the heart tree. She needed stillness, a moment to braid the days unraveling into sense. The heart tree's red leaves rustled, though no breeze brushed her cheeks. She knelt at its roots. The face carved in white bark watched with bleeding eyes. Steps crunching behind. Arya arrived, carrying 2 wooden cups of weak ale. She handed one over and sank cross-legged against the trunk. They chose us, she said after a sip. But tomorrow they may test us like metal and fire. I welcome the forge, Sansa told her. Arya tilted her head. There will be those who crave thrones. Some cannot surrender the game. Let them come, Sansa replied. Let them speak before circles. Words, not swords. Arya laughed softly. You speak like a sept-ogling sunrise. Sansa traced a finger along the carved bark groove. I speak like someone who has seen too many nights. They sat in companionable silence. Owls cooed. Distant songs lifted from taverns outside the walls. Do you fear? Arya asked. Constantly, Sansa said. But fear can steer feet as well as freeze them. Arya leaned back, looking up where red leaves met stars. I fear only quick endings. Stories deserve long telling. Sansa smiled. Then let us tell ours slowly. Above them, the heart tree listened. Old as the first grief, patient as a wheel newly set to turn by many hands. Morning's pale light found Sansa already at the castle library table, scrolls unfurled like sleepy serpents. She drafted provisional charters, tax ratios to ensure grain flows from bountiful valleys to barren hills, rotation schedules whereby each district sent scribes to keep impartial records, protocols for emergencies requiring joint consul assent. She wrote cautiously, leaving spaces blank for circle ratification. The Republic would not be one woman's design, but a quilt of many patches. Arya departed before breakfast, riding north to inspect roadways and garrisons, rumored abandoned. Podrick accompanied with 5 guards, though Arya called them ballast. She promised to return in a fortnight with reports, and perhaps a few smugglers turned ferrymen. By midday, envoys from White Harbor petitioned for harbor repair grants. Stonemasons from the western cliffs requested that tariffs on quarried basalt be lifted. Sansa listened, asked they draft proposals within circle format. Some Syed bureaucracy had complied when shown the blank spaces waiting their ink. That night, alone in her solar, Sansa reread her father's letters she had once hidden. Dispatches to bannermen, stern yet honorable. She realized how often he had sought counsel from others if quietly. She whispered gratitude to the memory of a man who planted seeds he would never see bloom in such wild shapes. On the roofwalk above the great hall she stood beneath stars. The lanterns of Winterfell spread like constellations fallen to earth, each flame a household, each needing oil, wick, and watch. Yet none alone formed the pattern. Together they traced the direwolf shape, head lifted toward future hunts. She felt no crown upon her head. Instead, a net of voices around her shoulders, light and strong. And the night seemed, for the first time in years, fathoms deep with promise rather than dread. Beyond the wall, a bitter wind scoured the frost-bit peaks. In a rough-hewn hall lit by whale oil lamps, a gathering of freefolk chiefs listened to a crow, no longer in black, but cloaked in gray without sigil, described the changes below. He spoke of circles and consuls, of a republic whose first law forbade conquest. The chiefs exchanged wary glances. But when the crow finished, an old spearwife spat into the fire and grinned. At last the kneelers bend knee to themselves, she said. Perhaps they stand straighter for it. The chiefs drank fermented goat milk and debated whether to send emissaries. Meanwhile, ravens winged south toward the Eyrie and west to the Iron Islands, each carrying gossip of a north unmoored from thrones. Seeds scattered on uncertain soil, yet some sprout and crack stonemasons ignored. Weeks unfolded. Not swiftly, yet filled with first steps. Carpenters traced routes for new roadbeds. Foresters labeled stands for shared harvesting. Scribes collated tallies of barley stores once hidden in lordly cellars. Sansa traveled to rills to mediate between fisherfolk and charcoal burners. She sat in longhouses in the Crannogs, listening to bog dwellers argue for equal weight in votes, despite sparse numbers. She learned to brew patience like mulled cider. Slow, constant heat, stirring when foam threatened boil over. Arya returned with sketches of watchtowers half collapsed, and suggestions to garrison them with rotating civilian militias. She described smugglers willing to legitimize trade if offered safe passes. She recounted rumors of southern lords murmuring about Stark rebellion, and she warned of envoys from King's Landing possibly seeking pretext to intervene in northerners' instability. Sansa took the warning soberly, but refused to shorten the Republic's infancy into hasty adulthood. In autumn's first chill, the Second Great Circle convened, larger than the first. The linen map, now nearly full, tokens overlapping like scales on a leviathan. They debated a charter article by article. Some clauses took hours, others days. The right of trial before peers stirred fierce discussion, whether peers meant neighbors or impartial outsiders. Ultimately, they crafted a compromise: 3 locals, 2 roving justiciars appointed annually by lot. Sansa marveled at the mosaic of safeguards they wove. Toward the charter's close, a final proposal arose, that the ancient words "winter is coming" be retained, not as house motto, but as Republic creed. A reminder that vigilance belongs to all seasons. The motion passed by acclamation. Sansa felt tears brim, surprised by her own sentimentality, yet the phrase spoke to shared precariousness, a humility monarchy too often forgets. When the charter at last lay complete, Conlon affixed his seal as recording maester. Then he broke the wax and stamped again, until every district representative had pressed their mark alongside his. The parchment bore more seals than space, a tapestry of authority diffused yet united. It would hang in the Great Hall, but copies would travel to each circle. No single version would rule others. That night, celebrations roared across Wintertown. Bonfires, whirling dances, mead spilled on cobblestones, songs invented on the spot. Sansa walked among revelers unescorted. Some recognized her, offered her horns of ale. She drank sparingly but accepted their toasts. A small girl tugged her sleeve and slipped a carved wooden heart into her palm, saying simply, "For listening." Sansa thanked her, voice thick. She tucked the heart in her pocket, feeling its smooth edges warm. At dawn she climbed the broken battlements to watch mist dissipate over the snow-fringed fields. Arya joined her, hair wind-tangled. 5 years ago, I dreamed only of leaving this place, Arya said. Now I fear missing what it might become. We will keep part of ourselves elsewhere, Sansa replied. So we can return with new eyes. They stood silent until sun breached the horizon, painting the courtyard gold. Below, workers already unloaded stone for tower repairs. Repairs not to restore feudal grandeur, but to house archives and a new school. Sansa sensed the future burgeoning like buds under bark, invisible yet unstoppable. If father saw this, would he understand? Arya asked. He always understood duty, Sansa said. We have merely changed its shape. A horn in the distance signaled arrival of another envoy, perhaps from the Vale this time, or the Trident. Arya rolled her shoulders, ready for diplomacy or duel. Sansa smiled, feeling the open road within her chest. Come, she said. The Republic waits. Together, they descended the stair. Two sisters not crowned but chosen, preparing to write the next slow, long chapter of a North newly fiercely alive. K. Morning's hush settled over Winterfell like a mantle of frost lace, thin yet intricately woven, dappling every courtyard flagstone in silvery gray. Even the clanging of the forge seemed gentle beneath the cool light. Sansa Stark crossed the upper walkway that linked the Rookery Tower to the east wing, cloak drawn tight against the lingering chill. Below, the courtyard bustled. Scribes rolled barrels of fresh ink toward the new records hall. Wagoners unloaded sacks of barley for the communal granary, and a pair of stonecutters argued amiably about lintel angles for the school they were raising beside the smithy. None of it felt hurried. Yet everywhere she looked she sensed deliberate motion, like an orchestra tuning itself for a movement. None had mastered, but all were determined to play. At the base of the watchtower, Maester Conlon waited with 2 folded letters. His narrow shoulders hunched beneath layers of wool, but his eyes were bright as robin eggs in spring. When Sansa reached him, he inclined his head, half bow and half shrug, the posture of a man who respected ceremony, only insofar as it did not cramp his parchment-inked fingers. Dispatch from the Eyrie, he said, offering the first missive. And a sealed raven from King's Landing. Both arrived past midnight. Wax bore the imprint of a seated falcon for the Eyrie. A circlet of weirwoods for the capital. A subtle nod to Bran the Broken's chosen sigil. Both monarch and memory. Sansa accepted the letters without comment. Correspondence from Bran had grown frequent but short, each note spare. 2 or 3 lines in his spidery script, hinting questions more than answers. She admired his deliberate lightness upon her newfound structures. It was as though the king knew that leaning too heavily might warp the beams before they set. The Eyrie seal belonged to Lady Royce, whose counselors had yet to agree whether the Vale should emulate the Northern Republic or double down on storied bloodlines. Sansa tucked the letters beneath her arm, aware that delayed replies fermented into rumor. Yet first she needed to greet the free folk envoy whose banner, blue cloth stitched with a white bear's skull, now appeared beyond the drawbridge. Arya had spotted the newcomers earlier from the outer battlements. She descended the stone spiral 2 steps at a time, the echo of her boots accompanying her grin. Since assuming the mantle of road consul, she had rarely remained within castle walls more than 3 nights. She returned now smelling of spruce and horse sweat, cheeks wind-burned, hair plaited down her back in a no-nonsense tail. Beside her rode Tormund Giantsbane, larger than memory, beard streaked with frost though the sun climbed. 6 free folk loped behind, most wearing mismatched leathers, all examining Winterfell's towers with wary fascination. Gatekeepers waved them inside. No fanfare greeted them, only the bellow of cattle and the rhythmic thunk of mallets from the carpenter's yard. Tormund dismounted with a grunt, and slapped the dust off his trousers. "Hells, girl, you've rebuilt half the world since I last drank your watered wine," he called up at Arya, though she stood scarcely half a head below his shoulder. She punched his arm in greeting hard enough to win a grunt. Sansa joined them, Conlan trailing. She offered the customary northern clasp, wrist to wrist. "You are welcome, and I promise the wine's stronger now, though if it proves too civilized I'll find something more barbaric." Tormund's laugh rumbled out, startling pigeons from the eaves. The Free Folk delegation brought a petition. They wished to formalize trade rights south of the Wall, salted fish for northern grain, iron tools for furs, and unexpectedly, a proposal to exchange stone-shaping techniques gleaned from ancient fortresses, unknown to southern masons. They carried sketches on scraped elk hide, prototypes of buttresses shaped like spiraling tusks, staircases carved to minimize erosion from wind. Arya unrolled one halfway down the Bailey wall for masons to peer at. The builders murmured over the ingenuity. Already Winterfell struggled to keep its burgeoning archive from outgrowing the old granary's second floor. In the great hall, the long tables had been cleared of morning trenchers and replaced with writing stands. Sansa offered the envoy a place near the hearth, not at the high table, but a side bench equal to her own seat. Conlan produced ink, quills, and 3 wooden bowls. Within lay the painted voting stones. 2 days remained before the monthly council, yet tradition now encouraged early visitors to cast advisory tokens. Free Folk leaders conferred among themselves in low Skagos tongue. They appreciated process, Sansa noted. They were used to voices counting. Negotiations filled the sunlight between third bell and dusk. They argued units of measure, southern bushels versus hidebound sacks. Argued duty of militias to keep roadways open through Last River. Argued whether stolen livestock could be tried under circle law when the suspect lived beyond the new border. Not once did they speak of bending knee. Theirs were bargains between equals. Arya, leaning back on 2 chair legs, occasionally interrupted to remind scribes of differences between raids and sanctioned levies. She knew the terror of semantics turned steel. Tormund at last spit into the fire, sealing the pact Free Folk style, and Conlan, gamely, did the same. Flecks of spit sizzling in the flames. Paper contracts would follow for archive. But the sizzle seemed to satisfy all. That evening Wintertown lit bonfires in the gravel square between New Infirmary and the wine shop. Children wove between benches, faces striped with paint courtesy of a traveling troupe from White Harbor. Musicians played fiddles and bone flutes. Free Folk and Northerners joined reels, distinctions blurred under lantern glow. Sansa stood at the edge with a flagon of mulled cider, inhaling cinnamon and pine resin. She spotted Lord Serwyn attempting the step hop of the wildling bear dance, laughing when he tripped. Progress not measured in charters alone, she thought, but in how shoulders relaxed when strangers became partners. Arya emerged from the crowd, hair loose now, a small silver flask dangling between fingers. "It works," she said, voice a hush meant for them alone. "Give them a circle and spears lower." She leaned against Sansa's shoulder. They had unlearned formality between them but not lost awareness of watchers. Nearby, a mason's apprentice eyed them, perhaps memorizing how approachable the consul seemed if approached with good hearts. Sansa sipped the cider. Small steps. Tomorrow brings fresh boots from the Vale. She produced Lady Royce's folded letter. They request observers. For now. Her eyes reflected torchlight. Cautious, resolute. Arya tucked the flask away. Observers can watch. Our road remains ours to patrol. She pointed through the open gate where wagons ticked off southward, loaded with alder planks and smoked cod. I ride at dawn for the stony shore, ports of iron-born reavers sniffing the cliffs. You should read Bran's note. Sansa nodded. Bran's message inside the wax no doubt held glimpses, visions, of threads pulling taut far beyond winter seas. Yet tonight, she chose stillness. She leaned into Arya enough to feel her sister's solid warmth, and together they watched Free Folk chiefs attempt Snow Bear shuffle to raucous laughter. The following dawn broke sharp and gilt, every rooftop ablaze in amber. Arya departed on Swiftwind with a dozen outriders. 2 spearmen from White Knife, 3 huntsmen whose bows rarely missed, Podrick Payne, and the free folk scout named Swift Meg, whose true given name ran so long, it tangled southern tongues. Sansa saw them off at the outer gate. Arya flashed the brief salute of the road. Palm over heart, fingers splayed to signify paths branching yet joined. Dust plumed behind the riders, dissipating like breath on cold iron. Sansa returned to the solar to unseal Bran's letter. Only 9 words spanned the parchment. Beneath them the slim sketch of a corvid wing. Wave crest rising, step carefully on shifting sand. Trust tide. She read it thrice, seeking something more precise. But Bran dealt in currents. Sansa turned the parchment over. On the back, faint lines hinted the coastline of Cape Kraken. Shifting sand indeed. Her thoughts flicked toward the ironborn rumors Arya chased. She drafted immediate dispatches. One to Bear Island requesting additional longboats patrol the shore. One south to King's Landing acknowledging Bran's foresight and promising vigilance. One to Lady Royce inviting her delegates to share witness seats at the coming harvest moot. Sometime near midday, as ravens lifted into pale blue, a patrol horn sounded atop the east wall. Sansa strode to the ramparts. 3 riders approached under a neutral banner. Dark blue field, white mountain, the Vale. Behind them, wagon after wagon rattled, bearing crates of seed potatoes, tool chests, and, most conspicuous, barrels slapped with red paint labeled for Winterfell scholars. Sansa smiled. Lady Royce sent not only watchers but gifts, the seed of deeper collaboration. She welcomed the Vale contingent in the courtyard. Leading them was Sir Giles Corbray, lean, silver-haired, famed once for a Valyrian steel blade, now retired to display. Accompanying him, a spectacled scholar named Maurice Spade, rumored bastard of some lesser house but credentialed by Old Town's citadel in hydrology. They bowed minimally. Corbray declared, "We come to observe the machinery of your republic, learn its rhythms, perhaps echo a few notes in the mountains of the moon." Spade offered a small bronze tube, a rainfall gauge. "First gift," she said. "We tally each other's skies, maybe forecast better seasons." Sansa respected understated diplomacy. She asked Conlon to arrange lodging near the West Library, where Vale books on rock strata could nest beside northern codices. She invited them to the circle floor next morning. In turn, Corbray produced a letter from Lady Royce. 8 neat lines praising Sansa's patience and cautioning that lords east of the Bloody Gate preferred gradual change. The subtext: do not alarm them with talk of peasant votes before seed catalogs prove bounty. Sansa tucked the letter into her sleeve, noting that change seldom moved swifter than trust. Evening found her in the half-finished records hall, where lamplight fell upon scaffolds and dust motes. Carpenters had cleared enough space for temporary desks. She reviewed parchment piles, road budgets, grain ledgers, judicial rosters. She forced herself to absorb each table, though her eyes blurred. The Republic's spine was data. To fail numbers invited famine or mutiny. Maester Conlon appeared again, this time with 2 steaming mugs of chicory brew. He waited until she set Quill down. "Lines between stars, my lady," he said, pushing a mug toward her. She blew across the surface, savoring bitterness. "You fear I chart too many constellations at once. I trust your night vision," he answered. "But wise sailors pack extra lanterns." He set a thin ledger before her, proposed witness network for circle testimony. Names scribbled: glassblowers, millers, midwives. People trained as neutral observers, traveling circuit to record circle decisions, so local minutes could not be doctored. It was judiciary oversight disguised as scribal exchange. Sansa scanned, impressed. "Necessary," she said, "but dangerous work. Some will resent prying eyes." Conlon shrugged slightly. Resentment, a lighter burden than tyranny. He took a sip. "Better small sparks of temper than long darkness. I will ask volunteers." Sansa closed her ledger. "See to their safety, messengers, outriders, modest stipends. An immunity within charter." She made a marginal note. Conlon inclined his head and shuffled off. Night grew deep. At last, Sansa retired to chambers once reserved for Stark heirs. She paused at the threshold, thinking how seldom she had slept here during the wars. She lit a single candle, let boots fall to the floor. From the window, she viewed torch points on the distant King's Road, free folk wagons rolling east under escort, each torch a thread weaving the North's tapestry. She felt pride, but along its edge thrummed sharp worry. Arya's progress, iron-born sails, the promise and peril of shifting sand. 2 days passed. The harvest mood assembled on schedule, this time thronging the gods' meadow with 400 delegates. Vale observers watched from raised platforms, their quills scratching. The free folk envoy remained. They set up a small copper pot still near the rear benches and occasionally topped cups. Agenda items spanned many pages. Adoption of overseeing scribes, allocation of river dredging funds, codified rescue protocols for winter blizzards. Debates rang hearty, laughter punctured tension. Occasionally Conlon called for order by striking 3 bronze bells. Mid-afternoon, as votes tallied unanimous for joint dredging of the White Knife Delta, a scout burst beneath pavilion eaves, panting, clothes torn by bramble. He knelt near Sansa, whispered urgent with eyes wide, all ears fixed on the dais. Sansa stood, composure hard as castle granite. "We recess," she declared. Delegates murmured. Conlon rapped his bells louder. Vale observers scribbled. In a smaller chamber behind the pavilion, she gathered her small council. Lord Glover, Lady Mormont, Maester Conlon, the Free Folk Chief Larsa Narrowfoot, and Sir Giles Corbray. The scout repeated. Iron-born longships landed south of Sea Dragon Point, sacking 2 fishing hamlets. Fires seen from Watch Hill. Arya's outriders clashed with the raiding party, driving them into cliffs. Early tie, 8 civilians dead, dozens missing, unknown casualties among Ironborn. Arya secured survivors in caves, sent Falcon signal for reinforcements, then chased the raiders' main force as it regrouped offshore. But 3 more sails spotted on horizon. Sansa listened, pulse pounding. She tasted ash of old fears. Yet, she steadied breath. Crisis required clarity. Lady Mormont snapped for maps. Corbray offered Vale infantry quartered near Castle Arryn, 2 weeks' march, but available. Larsa suggested rally whistles known to free folk ravagers along the ice. Glover grit his teeth, his son among fishers along that coast. Sansa raised her hand, and silence obeyed. Road Consul Arya leads defense, she pronounced. We reinforce swiftly by sea and land. Lady Mormont, dispatch your 2 fastest longboats with archers. Lord Glover, send mounted bowmen through Barrowfield, cut across Bear's Ridge to flank. She turned to Corbray. Vale assistance welcome, dispatch falcons with details, but hold heavy foot until winter passes the Erie passes. Finally to Larsa, free folk outrunners no cliff tracks. Guide Glover's men south, I trust your pathfinding. Conlon scribbled. Sansa's voice remained level though her heart hammered. The Republic stands because its people stand together. Understood? Heads nodded. Within an hour, ravens leaped skyward, garrison bells rang, and the castle's main yard filled with the clatter of war preparation, though they would call it defense. Sansa strode to parapets to watch Lady Mormont's longboats slip from the docks, sails unfurling like spreading wings. They bore no stark emblem. Mismatched stripes signified volunteer crews. She felt a prick of unease. Though the Republic shunned thrones, violence still demanded hierarchy of decision. She signed off nonetheless, and whispered to the wind that both Bran's tide and her sister's spear find safe harbor. Night draped its velvet, tension knotted every walkway. Sansa convened circle elders by torchlight. Delegates sat hushed, aware of smoke rising far off, though the wind bore no smell. She reported the raids, summarized orders, and called for emergency grain allocation to Sea Dragon Point survivors. Unanimous assent. She then offered a plain vow. If Ironborn think us disjointed, they will learn we align fiercer than chains. Thunderous applause shook even Vale scribes. After midnight, she walked alone along outer walls. Stars glittered cold. Distant flames flickered across black water. Ships burning maybe, or beacon towers lit in defense. She pictured Arya on a wave-sprayed cliff, hair whipping, sword flashing under moon. "Sister, come home." Dawn-tinted clouds move. A raven arrived before suncrest. Brief report penned in Arya's tight scrawl, stained by salt. Raiders repelled beyond Cape Kraken. Swift tactics. Casualties hours 3. Ship leaks, needs patch. Survivors, safe. Pursuing reavers until horizon. Love, always. Relief left Sansa weak-kneed. She pressed the parchment to lips. Yet still 3 sails had been sighted. The fight might stretch. She met delegates at breakfast benches, eyes rimmed red but posture straight. "Our gamble, trust and defense both shared," she told them. Craftsfolk volunteered spare pitch, sails, arrows. Freedmen from Deepwood Mott offered to man watchposts without pay. Vale observer Mararis Spade suggested sending storm gauges along the coast to predict riding windows, a scholar's remedy. Yet each puzzle piece counted. 3 days later, Arya returned in triumph and exhaustion. The courtyard cheered. Even ravens cawed overhead. 2 captured Ironborn stood bound, to face circle trial, not lordly wrath. Arya's cloak shredded. Her cheek sported a thin red slice. But her grin flourished, radiant as dawn. She jogged to Sansa, and though formal watchers waited, she flung arms around her sister. Cheers swelled. That evening inside the half-repaired West Tower, Arya recounted details. How free folk outrunners created stone slide traps. How Bear Island archers fire-arced tar barrels onto longship decks, forcing crews to ground on shoals. How she negotiated surrender terms promising safe return if captains testified to their lord's aggression before certain. Sansa marveled. The Republic's reach extended now not just in trade, but jurisprudence. Enemy commanders would stand before fisherfolk and charcoalers, their fates decided by the same stones that measured grain tithes. She asked Arya, "Did you fear for them, meeting justice so foreign?" Arya shrugged, washing dried blood from wrist. "Fear breeds when ignorance festers. Let them see fairness. If circles condemn, it is open daylight. Better than dungeons where truth starves." She flexed fingers, wincing. Sansa took her hand, checked the cut. "Only skin," Arya assured. The Vale observers filed into the Great Hall next day, requesting audience. They praised the Republic's mobilization. "Your people rallied before our scribes finished pen strokes," Mararis Spade remarked. Sir Corbray added with wry twist. "Some in the Vale fear mob rule. Yet your mob acts like seasoned phalanx when raiders threaten." He proposed formal defensive accord. Vale Rangers to patrol eastern passes in exchange for northern grain stores protected by joint garrisons. Sansa agreed to preliminary drafts, mindful of balancing autonomy with alliance. Later she penned Bran a summary. "The tide shifts. We plant posts deeper." With crisis quelled, Winterfell resumed slower rhythms. The free folk still, distillery now legitimate, exchanged whiskey for plow blades. Survivors of Sea Dragon Point sipped warm stew in per town infirmary. The Ironborn captains awaited trial, guarded by a mixed watch of conscripts. The next moot scheduled for early frost would deliberate not only their crimes, but codify protocols of international justice. A concept as new to some as summer snow. Sansa began touring smaller circles, traveling incognito when possible. She visited a sheepfold near Widow's Watch where children recited new covenant lines like prayer. "We keep watch, we speak true, we share bread." She slept in haylofts, ate leek soup, seasoned with sea salt, listened to murmured doubts. What if harvest fails? What if southern lords march north? She answered honestly, they might, and so vigilance was communal. Her presence calmed many. Her humility startled others. Rumor traveled faster. The hearth consul sat at rough tables, stitched torn sleeves herself, asked small folk to teach her new weaving knots. Arya, too, roamed, mapping river fords, training ad hoc militias in hit-run defense. She befriended a mummer troop and practiced sword dance, disguised as performance. She left chalk marks on indoors for Sansa, curved lines indicating safe rest or open ears. Their letters to each other grew longer, filled with gossip of traveling bakers or old maids who brewed unstoppable cider. They spoke of progress as though measuring seasons by hearts rather than snow. In late autumn, Bran arrived unannounced. 6 riders, 1 raven perched upon the saddle pommel of the king's carriage. He wore simple green, no crown visible, eyes distant yet sharp. Winterfell thundered in surprise. Sansa greeted him at the gate. Arya galloped from West Road within the hour, dusty and breathless. Bran smiled faintly at the fuss. "I come as witness, not judge," he said, voice quiet as snowfall. "May I see what you've built?" They gave him a tour that lasted days. The circle chambers in Wintertown, the mixed barracks where freedmen trained alongside former lordling squires, the archive wing with charters displayed. Bran listened more than spoke. His ravens circled overhead. In the Godswood, he placed his palm upon the heart tree and closed eyes for a full hour, while Arya perched idly upon a root humming a Braavosi lullaby. At supper, Bran addressed gathered delegates. "I see a tapestry woven from myriad threads, each thread alone fragile, together strong. Past kings wielded single-edged swords and called it rule. Here you forge plowshares and spears alike, each owner deciding which to lift. You will stumble. Yet each stumble echoes forward, shaping paths beyond your ken. I will not hinder. I will watch and guard the realm of men. But realms shift, as do thrones. Let the north teach winds to the south." He raised a cup, not of wine but local cider, and saluted the assembly. Applause followed. Some hesitant, most grateful. Bran departed 2 mornings later, leaving behind a carved chest of Old Town tomes on irrigation. His final words to Sansa: "Tides retreat, but promise return. Tend the shore." She watched his retinue fade into mist and wondered how long watchers remained, mere watchers. Midwinter set in with no fanfare, simply colder nights and starker sky vistas. Snow-covered fields. Road crews shoveled tirelessly to keep trade alive. The Republic's second charter winter would test its promise. Soap rations to far hamlets, grain distributions, roving healers combating frost fevers. Sansa worked late, forming contingency stockpiles. Arya drilled militia archers to fire in sleet and taught free folk spear tricks to White Harbor dockhands. And they rarely saw each other, except for dawn debriefs, before hearth coals. Yet in those 10-minute windows, they exchanged more faith than some siblings manage in decades. One blizzard-lashed night, a knock echoed on Sansa's chamber door. Arya slipped inside, snow-dusting hair. She tossed a sack upon the table. "Caught your numbers glazing," she teased. The sack contained small wooden tokens carved with symbols of every district. "I had them copy the voting stones. Use them like counters on your ledgers. Remind yourself each figure equals a family." Sansa touched a token shaped like a pine cone from Wolf's Den. Emotion tightened her throat. Arya poured 2 cups of dark mead and sprawled on the bearskin rug. "Tell me," she said, "if tomorrow every house south marched north, would you flee?" Sansa sat beside her. "No," she replied, "because tomorrow every circle stands, stones in hand, hearts high. That is fortress enough." Arya clinked cups. "Then tomorrow I ride again with lighter steps." They drank without further words, firelight painting shifting gold across ceiling beams. As winter deepened, the Republic endured. Grain reached Deepwood Motte ahead of storms. Refugees from Ironborn raids rebuilt fishing huts with communal lumber. The Ironborn captains faced the Great Circle. After testimonies, they were sentenced to rebuild the same hamlets they'd razed, laboring through winter seas under supervision. Many scoffed at leniency. Yet Sansa judged redemption cheaper than perpetual blood feud. Arya guarded the captains personally first voyage. None dared mutiny under her needlepoint stare. Spring teased with early thaw. Rivers swelled, carrying ice floes that sparkled like broken mirrors. Sansa hosted delegations from the Riverlands, curious about rotating consuls. She offered tours, warned them rebellion without preparation courted famine. Arya staged mock raids to test new coast beacons, free-folk horns echoing down cliffs. A sense of rhythm settled. Growth, trial, forgive, grow again. One dusk they met on the ramparts as sunset bled crimson behind the west tower. Snowmelt dripped from crenel gaps. Sansa exhaled mist. We promised to stretch story across 5 hours, she mused. How many pages left? Arya leaned on the parapet, hair streaked copper by light. Enough for another lifetime, she said. But slow chapters taste sweeter. They stood in silence until stars pricked sky, each star a token, each token a voice, each voice a vow, to keep watch against winter, to guide rather than rule, to build a north where freedom rang like hammer on hot steel and echo lingered even after song fell quiet. 1K. Winter's retreat in the north was never a single event, but an ongoing argument. Ice grinding against riverbank, snow surrendering inch by grudging inch to the budding force of sunlight. Even as Sansa Stark rose before dawn each day, she was greeted by the contest's evidence. New puddles in the yard, muddy footprints in the corridors, the sweet yet pungent scent of rot where compost heaps thawed beside the keep's wall. There was hardship in these transitions, but also hope, the kind that crept up on the world quietly and left every heart restless for what might follow. The Godswood, long a realm of hush and shade, was coming to life. Roots still gripped frost, yet the air vibrated with bird call and the slow percussion of sap rising. Sansa walked there most mornings now, accompanied by 2 guards who knew better than to interrupt her thoughts. She knelt at the heart tree's roots, the old god's red leaves whispering. She remembered her mother's prayers, her father's stoic silences, her own childhood games amid snowdrifts. Now she carried their memory differently, not as burden, but as anchor. Returning to the castle proper, she found Maester Conlon waiting beside the stone arch. He held a slate board, already crammed with notes from circle scribes. A fire in a Crannog village, quickly put out by neighbors. A vote on fishing quotas in White Knife. A marriage proposal submitted to the moot for approval. An odd practice, but one that had become popular among villages who took pride in public ritual. They want you to officiate, Conlon said, mouth quirking. But the bride's father insists Arya do it if she returns by month's end. Apparently she's considered luckier? Sansa laughed. A bright sound that startled a rook from the battlements. Let Arya know she's to play Septon as soon as she's within a day's ride. Tell her she can't say no unless she wants the entire north to believe she's courting bad fortune. Conlon's eyes twinkled behind the smudged lenses. He made a note on the slate, already halfway to his next errand before Sansa could add more. She paused by a window to watch the early sun glint off the slate roofs, thinking of Arya's last letter, half report, half rambling tale about wolves she'd seen ranging near the gorge. Their tracks mingled with those of wild sheep. Arya had not yet returned from the coast, where she'd been overseeing the training of a mixed militia. Free folk, Wintertown youth, and even a few exiled Ironborn, trying to make honest work of themselves. Her days were spent on horseback or boat, her nights camping with her charges. She wrote home only when she had something funny or troubling to share. Her absence was never a vacancy. It was the tension in the string that kept Sansa's world in tune. In Arya's absence, the day-to-day work of governance fell squarely on Sansa's shoulders, and she relished the challenge. Circle meetings had grown larger and more confident, with the delegation from the Vale now sending their own observers as regular participants, rather than wary outsiders. Glover and Mormont, old rivals, found themselves collaborating on a proposal for road repair and disaster response. Sansa suspected half their meetings were spent trading stories about ancestors, but so long as the roads were mended, she would let them argue. The latest circle sat at tables drawn together in the newly finished hall beside the archives, a building that smelled perpetually of sawdust, lamp oil, and fresh parchment. The high windows let in a sharp cold light, and every meeting began with shuffling benches, adjusting for more voices than anyone expected. Sansa presided with calm authority, never letting her tone become iron or her word the final one. The practice was to let debate unfold, to allow dissent to surface without fear. This session, a young beekeeper named Mira had the floor, arguing for looser restrictions on hive locations and a share in the new trading caravan. She spoke with trembling hands but clear logic. When a miller scoffed, Sansa asked for the scribe's tally of honey contributions over the last 3 years. The record silenced the room. Mira's proposal carried, and the circle cheered her as she sat. Later, Sansa found her outside in the cold, hands shaking. She pressed a warm flask of broth into her hands. "The North is strongest when it listens," she said. "And when it answers." Afterward, Sansa slipped away to read the day's reports. New berths in the rills. A shipment of river sand for glassmaking. The arrival of the first southern traders that spring. The latter brought anxiety, though it was the kind that sharpened resolve. Southern goods were coveted, but southern politics less so. Merchants from King's Landing and Old Town had begun arriving in greater numbers, keen to taste northern novelty and gauge the Republic's resolve. Their presence was managed with courtesy but caution. Sansa insisted all deals pass through the Circle for approval and documentation, and she assigned Circle-appointed stewards to accompany every negotiation. At first, southern traders balked, used to the ease of bribing a lord's steward or buying favor from a seneschal. Here, the entire process was visible, and the people of the North watched with a kind of grim satisfaction as deals were made, or unmade, in open view. Sansa made certain the records were posted in the new public hall. Who traded, what was exchanged, who had spoken for or against the deal. If merchants wanted northern wool, they would pay the price not just in coin, but in transparency. One late afternoon, as snow turned to mist, a delegation from the Riverlands arrived. 3 women and 2 men, all traveling on sturdy ponies, their cloaks thick and travel-stained. Their leader, Lady Elaine Stone, was no lady in the high-born sense but a landholder from Maidenpool, newly raised by the region's own experiments with local circles. She was practical, sharp-eyed, and unafraid to question Sansa directly about the risks of their new governance. Over supper in the Winterfell solar, they traded tales of mistakes and victories, how the Riverlands had nearly collapsed into feuds before Circle law calmed tempers, how Winterfell's earliest moots were nearly undone by personal vendettas. The talk grew philosophical, but also grounded. How do you convince stubborn men to cede authority to neighbors? How do you punish when there is no lordly hangman? Sansa explained their evolving system. Judges chosen by lot, sentences tempered by consensus, and reparations always preferred over vengeance. Elaine listened, then described her own approach. In Maidenpool, they offered labor rather than coin as compensation, and relied on a council of elders, mostly women, to keep the peace. The 2 women laughed, exchanging rueful nods. Both agreed the men who resisted such changes usually came around when the bread rose higher and the fields grew thicker with wheat. "A full belly breeds content," Elaine quipped, "but empty pockets can start a war." When they parted, Sansa promised her a seat at the next great circle, and Elaine in turn invited Sansa to visit Maidenpool. Sansa accepted with the caveat that she could not leave until Arya returned. "She is as much the North's protector as I am its steward," she said. Elaine's eyes gleamed. She understood the value of shared rule. The days unfolded in measured sequence. Sansa oversaw the distribution of new seeds, lentils, barley, and a rare strain of crimson clover, said to enrich tired soils. She convened a special moot to address river flooding and dispatched teams to reinforce embankments. In the evenings, she visited the archives, tracing the slow accretion of records, petitions, votes, disputes settled. Each bundle of parchment was another thread in the Norse tapestry. Arya returned at last, sunburnt and lean, 2 wolves trailing her like shadows. She strode through Wintertown in the middle of a bustling market day, boots caked with road mud, hair wild, wearing the battered cloak of a man she'd bested in dice somewhere near the Flint Cliffs. The people greeted her with cheers, small children clustering around her knees. She hoisted one onto her shoulders, tossed coins to another, and winked at a baker's wife who slipped her a honeyed oatcake. That night, she and Sansa reunited over roasted root vegetables and free folk ale. Arya spoke in bursts, recounting the trials and triumphs of her militia. She had broken up a feud in a fishing village, taught a freeborn boy from Skagos to fight with twin knives, and tracked a band of would-be raiders all the way to the edge of the neck, only to find them selling eels to Crannogman. "They're more interested in profit than plunder now," Arya laughed. "Maybe the Circle will have to tax their eel sales." Sansa listened, equal parts amused and proud. "You're due at a wedding," she said when Arya paused for breath. "The bride's father says you're luckier than any septon." Arya groaned, then grinned. "Luck has little to do with weddings. I'll wear my cleanest shirt." The wedding itself was a riotous affair. Circles from 5 villages converged, each bringing food, drink, and wild stories. Arya officiated with minimal ceremony and maximum laughter, inviting the couple to spar with wooden swords as part of the vows. Sansa watched from the edge, delighting in the spectacle, noting how much joy was rooted in participation rather than obedience. When the couple exchanged promises, they were cheered not by nobles but by neighbors. The new season of circles began. The public hall, now fully furnished, hosted its first moot entirely in the round. No dais, no head table. Sansa and Arya took seats with everyone else, their titles set aside. The agenda was full. Allocation of summer fishing rights, proposed repairs to the East Road, a request from Bear Island for timber. Every decision was made by raised hand, then recorded by 2 scribes. At the end, Maester Conlon stood and announced the tally, then asked for dissent. When none came, the agreement stood. The process was slow, but no one felt cheated or unheard. Trade continued to blossom. The Riverland sent flour and dried fruit. In return, the North exported wool, smoked fish, and the first barrels of a pine-flavored beer, concocted by a rogue septon turned brewer. Sansa invited Southern scholars to lecture in the new school, while Northern healers traveled south to share knowledge of frostbite and winter fevers. Ties of blood faded, replaced by bonds of shared risk and mutual need. There were setbacks. One night, a fire broke out in the winter town granary. 3 homes burned before the flames were doused, and 2 children died. Sansa visited the families herself, not with empty words but with gifts of wood and warm bread, and sat beside the ashes in silence. Arya organized a rebuilding crew, calling in old debts and favors. Within days, new rafters rose, and the families who'd lost everything were the first to move in. In Circle, the cause of the fire was debated. Was it the carelessness of a baker, or the fault of a loose lantern left by a hurried steward? The answer was uncertain, but the Circle voted to establish a night watch, with shifts drawn by lot from every household. No one complained, every hand rose, even those still bandaged from the fire. When the last embers cooled, Sansa watched the town gather in a moment of shared silence, broken only by the call of a night bird. The Republic had not prevented tragedy, but it had given the people a way to heal. As summer reached its zenith, Arya led an expedition north to the edge of the haunted forest, seeking rumors of wildlings considering migration. She returned with tales of a giant seen at a distance, and a pouch of seeds gifted by a crone who claimed to remember the coming of the first men. She said we'd forgotten more than we remembered. Arya told Sansa over a midnight drink. Maybe she's right, but what we have now is something new. Men under Rwandan. Sansa nodded, looking out over the starlit courtyard where voices still drifted in the warmth. We remember what we need, she said, and we invent what we must. The next great moot brought together every corner of the north. Delegations from Skagos arrived by boat, Riverlanders by horse, free folk on foot. The gathering lasted a week. Debate, celebration, music, and grief all woven together. Arya presided over a contest of arms, pitting the youngest against the oldest. Sansa led a recitation of the Circle's founding charter, each village adding a line of their own. At the end, beneath a sky thick with cloud and promise, Sansa addressed the assembly. We have chosen a new road, not of thrones, but of circles, not of crowns, but of counsel. Let the world see our unity, our courage, our resolve. Let us be judged by our deeds, and not our names. Let us build a north that will endure not for its walls, but for its people. May! A great cheer rose, echoing across fields and rivers, and the firelight carried their voices long into the night. Time passed. The seasons changed. The north grew stronger, not through conquest or rule, but by the slow, stubborn miracle of community. There were more crises, a bandit raid here, a poor harvest there, a bitter quarrel over river rights. But always, the circles met. Always, the people decided. Sansa watched the future unfolding. Sometimes haltingly, sometimes in leaps, and knew there would be no going back. Arya came and went, her journeys growing longer as the North's reach extended. She wrote Sansa, always with news and laughter, never letting distance become absence. Together, they forged a new legend, not of queens and war, but of sisters and shared burdens. On the eve of another winter, Sansa stood upon Winterfell's walls, snow swirling. Below, the town glowed with life. Lanterns, music, voices. Arya climbed to join her, boots crunching. "The world's still turning," she said. Sansa nodded. "And so are we." They looked out together, watching as the first true flakes of winter fell, not as a threat, but as the old god's benediction upon what they had built. The North, at last, belonged to its people, and in their keeping, it would endure. Ohayen, Papei. Autumn ripened and receded, the fields fading from green to gold to brown. Across the north, harvest bells rang, some cracked and battered, some newly forged in communal smithies, each a signal to all that the long labor was ending, and another was about to begin. From the high vale of the rills to the pebble beaches of Bear Island, wagons rumbled toward Winterfell, not as tribute, but in a weaving caravan of free men and women. Every axle, every hoofbeat, every shout of greeting or playful curse was proof of the North's change. Proof that the Republic was not a brief season, but a turning of the world itself. Sansa stood atop the eastern wall on the day the first wagons arrived, her cloak lined with wolf fur, wind tangling her auburn hair. She watched the lines of people as they snaked into Winter Town. Farmers leading stubborn oxen, children perched atop hay bales, old matriarchs cradling baskets of cheese or hand-woven cloth. Some banners bore crude sigils, half remembered from old houses, half invented for new guilds and villages. Many bore nothing but the dust of travel. The songs rising among them were not the battle anthems of ages past, but rough work songs, love ditties, and here and there, the first of a new kind of ballad, one that spoke of votes cast and debts forgiven, of neighbors welcomed and old enemies offered bread. Beneath the walls, Arya raced a handful of boys through the muddy streets, their boots kicking up a spray that painted her breeches dark to the knees. She vaulted a wagon tongue, caught a falling apple from a girl's upflung hand, and tossed it back with a wink. Her sword was sheathed, but she wore it openly, and the sight, once a threat, was now a reassurance to every mother and merchant who saw her. When she reached the gates, Arya planted herself by the registration table and helped tally names, trading jokes with a crannogman whose voice was so low and guttural the scribes had to lean in and cup their ears to understand him. The gathering for the autumn moot was the largest yet. Circles sent delegates from every hamlet, some bearing gifts, some requests, some merely curious. The great hall, now ringed with banners of all kinds, was flanked by open-air kitchens and tents, bonfires that smoked all day and glowed through the night. Sansa walked among them, not as queen, not as lady, but as hearth consul, nodding to old friends and newcomers alike. Every hour she was stopped by someone needing her ear. A furrier proposing new tariffs on southern imports, a group of stonemasons disputing the division of quarry rights, a nervous septa fretting over her share of the winter food store. Sansa listened, always. If she grew weary, she let no one see it. Her words, so long careful and measured, grew warmer as she saw the faces around her. These were not her subjects, they were her neighbors, and that difference made every conversation lighter, even when the burdens discussed were heavy. At the moot's opening, the God's Walk was thronged with color. Scribes prepared new sheets of parchment, tokens and tally stones gleamed in baskets. The air was brisk and electric. Maester Conlon called the assembly to order, and the crowd quieted with a kind of collective inhale, a readiness that was part anticipation, part hope. This moot, unlike any before, saw representatives from beyond the North's borders. Lady Elaine Stone and 2 Riverlanders took seats with the White Knife fishermen and Bear Island smiths. A Vale observer sat in the gallery, scribbling furiously. Even a Dornishman in a sand-colored cloak, cheeks red from northern winds, found space at the edge, trading dried apricots for a spot near the fire. Sansa welcomed each, her voice steady and carrying. They spoke first of the harvest. Grain stores good, root cellars fuller than last year, with only Deepwood Motte reporting a shortfall after a late blight. Delegates from Moti described their loss plainly. Within the hour, votes passed to send barley and oats from other districts. No one objected. Old men who remembered the Bolton's rule shook their heads, muttering disbelief at the swiftness of the decision, the absence of threats or haggling. Next came the question of winter work. The North's old lords would have ordered. Now the Circle asked, what can be done to fill the months of cold? Stonecutters proposed rebuilding the western bridge near Barrowton, destroyed by spring floods. Woodwrights offered new plans for smokehouses, so fish from the White Knife would last until melt. Arya stood to speak for the road patrols, recommending that every able-bodied youth be given the choice to join. Men and women both, free folk and townsfolk. No coin needed, only a sense of duty and a willingness to learn. Her suggestion drew the loudest applause yet, and the moot voted to provide boots and cloaks from the communal stores for any who volunteered. The southern traders were next. Two had already attempted to bribe a Circle scribe, ignorant of the new customs. Instead of secret dealings, their petitions were read aloud. Offers for iron ore, requests to open a southern market, thinly veiled probes into whether the North's new order might be undone by enough gold or wine. The Circle's response was blunt. The North would trade, but only on terms set openly, and no amount of silver could buy a secret council. The traders grumbled, but stayed. Goods were exchanged, contracts signed in the open, and a few, intrigued by the northern way, resolved to return with their families next year. As dusk fell on the third day, a storm swept in from the sea, scattering tents and soaking the banners. The moot pressed on beneath hastily built awnings and in crowded hearth rooms. Sansa, cloak-sodden, dined with a baker's guild from White Harbor, hearing stories of winter hunger and how the new food levy had spared their youngest children from rickets. Arya, hair dripping, told tales by firelight of a wildling who taught her how to snare snow hares with nothing but a bent stick and patience. Everywhere, voices mingled. Highborn, lowborn, free folk, southern guests, each distinct and yet now undeniably northern. That night, with thunder rolling over the keep, Sansa sat in her solar, a rough blanket around her shoulders, and composed a letter to Bran in King's Landing. She wrote not of triumphs but of doubts, how even with circles and charters, arguments still ran hot, and tempers flared, and sometimes, even now, there were those who longed for the old order to return. She asked his advice not as king, but as brother. How do you keep a people united when the world beyond still divides itself by crowns and chain? She signed it simply, your sister, always Sansa. Bran's reply came a week later, borne by a raven that landed in the new dovecote, shaking rain from its wings. His words, as always, were few, but they settled in her mind like stones in a stream. The river flows, Sansa, because it accepts all waters. Tend the banks, not the source, and the current will guide itself. While Sansa pondered his meaning, Arya found herself on the road again, traveling north with a caravan bound for Last Hearth. She rode at the head of a column of wagons carrying supplies. But her true task was to mediate a brewing dispute between two settlements. One old, one new, both claiming rights to a patch of timberland left wild since the wars. The argument had grown sharp, with talk of axes and old grudges. Arya listened to both sides in turn, then led their elders on a hunt through the disputed woods. They tracked elk and wildcats, found a half-collapsed fort from some forgotten campaign, and over a shared meal of roast venison, forged an agreement. The woods would be logged by both, with plantings for every tree cut, and the fort restored as a refuge for any in need. Arya marked the spot with a pair of stones, one from each camp, set together beneath the roots of an ancient pine. Returning south, Arya wrote to Sansa of her success, but also her fears. The old anger is slow to fade, she wrote. We must be more stubborn than winter if we hope to outlast it. Sansa read the letter in the old godswood, the red leaves hissing above her. She summoned Conlon and the stewards of the circles, and together they devised a new plan. Every dispute over land, trade, or marriage that could not be solved locally would be heard at the autumn moot, judged by a rotating panel chosen by lot. No more secret feuds, no more justice by blade in the night. The rule was simple: sunlight on every wound. Arya returned just in time to cast her own lot, and the first such panel, a mixture of smiths, healers, a singer, and an aging knight who'd once served the Boltons, listened to both sides of the next dispute, argued all night, and delivered a compromise at dawn. Both parties accepted it, and the precedent was set. As the first snows fell, the North was ready. Food was distributed, roads marked, shelters opened for the old and young. The circle met less frequently, but worked no less hard. With each passing month, the need for Sansa's intervention grew less. The Republic was becoming real, not just in law, but in the hearts and habits of the people. Then, as if to test the North's new strength, a harder challenge came. South of Wintertown, a sickness spread among the cattle herds, striking swiftly and taking whole villages' winter hopes with it. Panic ran quicker than the illness itself. Sansa gathered the moot by messenger and fire signal, and within days, teams of healers and free folk riders moved from farm to farm, burning infected carcasses, sharing what little milk and cheese could be spared. Some called for harsh penalties against the first farmer whose herd had fallen ill, but the panel ruled. No blame, only aid. The afflicted were given food and firewood, and when spring finally loosened the frost, calves from every healthy village were sent to restock their neighbors' herds. Through this, Sansa and Arya worked as one, though in different ways. Sansa, steady and present, holding the circles together, never allowing fear to turn to vengeance. Arya, swift and visible, tracking new cases, lifting spirits with laughter, sometimes vanishing for days, only to return with wild garlic or a brace of rabbits for the sick. The crisis passed. When the final tally was done, the North had lost much but survived. The bonds between villages, between people, were stronger. There were more shared songs that winter, more stories told, than any Sansa could remember from her girlhood. Spring crept in, reluctant, pale, persistent. The riverlands sent seeds and fish fry for the ponds. A band of Dornishmen rode north, seeking to see the Republic for themselves, to barter oranges for wool and stories. The first moot of the new year was the most joyous yet. Sansa, her hair unbound and face flushed with relief, presided as the delegates from every corner of the North stood to give their own account, not just of hardship, but of kindnesses received. Arya arrived at the end of the moot, breathless and muddy, having ridden from the edge of the Skagosi cliffs to deliver news. A shipwrecked crew from the Stormlands had been found by freefolk, nursed through the last storm, and sent home with food and furs. That night, Arya and Sansa climbed the tower together. Below them, the lights of Wintertown glimmered. Circles within circles, houses, fires, neighbors, friends. The North, once a land of cold solitude and harsh rulers, was warm with its own company. "You think we've won?" Arya asked, leaning back to watch the aurora slip across the sky. Sansa shook her head. "There's no winning, only waking every day and choosing. But we've made something new, something that might last." Arya grinned, teeth flashing. "Let's keep choosing then." As the sisters watched the night, they knew the world beyond might never understand the North's Republic, or its stubborn, open-hearted ways. But for the people beneath the swirling lights, for the children who now ran laughing where once there were only whispers and shadows, for the men and women who stood shoulder to shoulder in the circle, there was no question. The North was theirs. And whatever winter came next, they would meet it together. Circles within circles, voices joined, unbreakable, unbowed. Yeah, Kai. The snow melted in trickling sheets, and the rivers ran fat and brown, overflowing their banks into the black fields. By mid-spring, the North glistened with mud and promise. Every path leading toward Winterfell was furrowed by cart tracks, every pond rimmed with the green haze of new life. Along the ridges and through the woodlands, the ancient, half-forgotten roads that once bore only soldiers now carried families, merchants, and council delegates, all heading toward the next great moot. The first warm days arrived like a benediction, stirring the air with birdsong and the scent of thawing pine. Sansa stood in the window of her solar, brushing her hair in the morning sunlight, and watched the waking bustle below. Stalls reappeared in Wintertown's market square, piled high with the first foraged greens, baskets of goose eggs, and the last of the winter-cured venison. The new school was open, its yard crowded with children. Scribes from the circle drafted tallies for the coming assembly, their benches filled with quarrelsome farmers and bold-tongued apprentices eager to weigh their town's votes. She pulled on her boots, wrapped her deep green cloak around her, and stepped out into the clean chill of spring. She greeted the gate guards, 2 girls this morning, sisters from Barrowton, taking their turn at the wall and eager for any news. Sansa gave them both a smile and a few gentle words. She paused to chat with Maester Conlon, who was feeding bits of bread to the first flock of pigeons returning from the south. "Word from Maidenpool," he reported, as a sleek blue pigeon settled on his wrist, "and from White Harbor. The Riverlands and the Manderleys both send observers for the moot." "Are they coming to trade or to spy?" Sansa teased. "Both, if I know my fellow maesters." Conlon grinned and released the bird. "But all are welcome, if they come with empty hands and open hearts." Arya arrived just after midday, covered in road dust, leading a band of free folk riders and 3 Hill clan women with sunburned faces. She rode up grinning, her wolf, Nymeria, loping at her side, gray fur gleaming. Arya swung down before Sansa could take more than a step. "We beat the river crossing, barely. You should see it, Sansa. It's up to the horses' bellies. The last of the old snow is gone, and the marshes are alive with frogs and birds. Did you get my last letter?" "Den. About the wildlings settling on the edge of the lakes." Sansa nodded. "The moot will need to discuss it. There's talk that the marshlanders and the new folk are at odds over fishing rights and water paths. But I'm glad you're here. I'd rather have you beside me for the debate." Arya squeezed her arm. "I wouldn't miss it. Not when I can see you settle old scores with nothing but your voice." The moot began 2 days later in a meadow beyond the castle walls, a sea of benches and makeshift tents rippling beneath banners and spring sky. Delegates arrived from every compass point: Deepwood Motte, White Knife, Skagos, the Barrowlands, even Saltpans and Maidenpool in the south. Each carried a bundle of tally stones and a new request for the agenda. The free folk sat apart at first, wary but proud, their own colors bright against the faded northern banners. The Riverlands sent a handful of practical mud-splattered women with sheaves of parchment and a clever-eyed scribe called Melantha, who wore both northern and southern trinkets as proof of her travels. At the opening circle, Sansa stood not on a dais but in the grass, cloak thrown back, her voice clear as the new wind. She welcomed the guests, called out the names of each village, praised the returning healers, and those who had kept the roads open through the last storm. The children of Wintertown sang a new song about the rivers and the boats, their voices rising in bright, uneven harmony. Arya sat cross-legged among the delegates, sharing roasted nuts with a Skagosi youth, laughter flashing in her eyes. The agenda began with the question of the lakes, their fishing, their boundaries, and the wildlings' new settlements along their muddy shores. The first to speak was a grizzled man from the Crannogs, who feared losing his family's ancestral reed beds. "We've cut rushes here since the first men," he declared, long before wildlings came down from the Frostfangs. A tall free-folk woman rose in answer, her voice ringing like a hammer on iron. "We only seek room to fish, not to steal. Our children starve beyond the wall. Now we ask for a place and will fish our share or less." "Oh?" Arya urged compromise. Shared waters, with quotas set and enforced by a panel of 3 from each community. Any who fished beyond the agreed days would face the Circle's judgment, and wildlings would teach their southern neighbors the art of net mending and ice fishing. Sansa watched as debate shifted from suspicion to curiosity, and by day's end, the measure passed, 10 hands to 1. The wildlings would share the lakes, and in turn, each village would send a boy or girl north for a summer, to learn from the newcomers, creating bonds that even old feuds might one day forget. Next came the grain levy, a touchy subject as always. Barley yields were good, but a blight had touched the oat fields near the Dreadfort, and the Bear Islanders, proud and stubborn, bristled at sending their share south. Sansa listened, her brow furrowed, then asked for the store's tally from each quarter. The numbers showed the truth. The North, as a whole, was flush, but only if Bear Island shared. Sansa did not command, but she recounted, in careful words, how Bear Islanders had been first to aid Deepwood Motte the winter past, and how every village owed its survival not to luck or lords, but to the Circle's promise. Share what you have, and you will not go hungry. In the end, the Bear Islanders relented, on the condition that the next moot be held on their stony shore, so that others might see the hardships they endured. Arya promised to attend, and the Bear Chief grinned. "I'll teach you to wrestle a seal, Stark." Evenings brought feasts, simple, hearty meals eaten on the grass beneath a sky soft with stars. Arya led a contest of knife-throwing, and told wild tales of her time in Bravos. Sansa sat with the elders, listening to old stories and newer ones, piecing together the North's patchwork history. The Riverlands delegates shared stories of their own circle moots, and the Dornishmen, bold and dark-eyed, recited a poem of water and wind that left the audience quiet for long minutes. Children danced around the fire, and old grudges were set aside, at least for a night. On the fourth day, the moot took up the most difficult question: justice. A murder had been committed in the winter. 2 men, one northern, one wildling, both with blood on their hands after a drunken quarrel in a border camp. The panel of judges included a smith from White Harbor, a healer from Skagos, a freefolk matron, and a visiting Riverlander. Witnesses gave their stories, each piece a shard of a larger truth. The panel withdrew, deliberating long into the evening, before returning with their decision. Neither man would be put to death, but both would labor the summer in each other's village, mending fences and digging wells, their every act supervised and every grievance confessed before the Circle each week. Some called it leniency, others wisdom. Sansa was silent, but later, sitting by the riverside with Arya, she said, "We are inventing new law. Sometimes it feels like walking across a frozen lake. Every step might crack the ice." Arya threw a stone into the water, watching the ripples spread. "Better to walk together than alone. If we fall, at least we'll know the water's cold for all of us." The moot ended with a new charter, its lines amended and ratified by every community, its words plain and sturdy as the people who spoke them. As delegates packed their wagons, Arya went from camp to camp, trading news and jokes, promising to visit soon. Sansa stayed until the last banner was furled, the last scribe's tally recorded. She walked the empty meadow, breathing the damp air, and thought of what they had built. Not a kingdom, not a single house rule, but a living bond. After the moot, the North moved with the energy of spring. Markets flourished, new roads opened, and the children who had traveled north or south to learn from other villages returned with stories and songs. Sansa found herself less burdened by petitions. More and more, the Circles handled disputes before they ever reached Winterfell. She spent her mornings walking the ramparts, her afternoons in the school, her evenings drafting letters to allies and friends. The Riverlands sent a young scholar to study northern law, and in exchange the North's healers learned the southern art of brewing willow bark tea for fever. Arya spent weeks on the road, sometimes returning only for a day or two, sometimes not at all. She led a patrol south to the Neck, parleyed with a band of brigands who agreed to lay down arms for a place among the freefolk, and tracked a lost boy to a hunter's camp on Skagos, returning him to his family with a stern lecture and a new knight. Her legend grew. Some called her Arya the Circle, others Arya the Wolf. She laughed at both names, but Sansa knew her sister's fame was a shield as much as a burden. In late summer, news arrived from King's Landing. A southern lord had been deposed by his own council, citing the North's example as cause. Letters poured in, cautious inquiries from the Vale, Dorne, even the Reach. Some praised, some threatened, most were curious. Would the North support uprisings elsewhere? Would Sansa claim a queen's mantle, or offer armies to her southern cousins. Sansa answered every letter with patience and care, promising trade, not war, and counsel, not conquest. She wrote Bran too, seeking his guidance. His reply was brief. "The world changes, sister. Let it change you in turn, but never forget where your roots run." The first frost of autumn found Arya and Sansa side by side again on the walls of Winterfell. They watched the workers stack wood, the cattle driven into the yards, the last wagons leaving the fields. Arya tossed a coin to a barefoot girl, who darted away laughing. "You think we've done enough?" Arya asked, her voice half mirth, half doubt. Sansa wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. "Enough for this year. Enough for now. But there's always another winter coming." "Know her?" Arya nodded, her eyes shining with something fierce and unbroken. "Then we'll meet it, together, like always." And so the North, reborn and resolute, moved into the cold seasons once more. Circles met by candlelight. The people decided and endured. Sansa and Arya, sisters, leaders, servants of their people, walked the quiet corridors and busy fields, a living bond at the heart of a republic that no crown could claim and no winter could break. A.K. The first true cold arrived not as a storm, but as a slow tightening. Nights grew brittle and blue, the air clear and sharp. Frost crept along the window panes, tracing ferns of ice on the glass. And every footfall on the packed earth outside Winterfell's walls rang a little harder, a little lonelier. But with the cold came clarity. The North, more than any place in Westeros, understood what it meant to endure, understood that each year was a proving, each winter a test, and that what could not bend must break. Inside Winterfell, Sansa felt it in the change of her daily routines. The crisp way the council met before dawn to allocate firewood and salted fish. The sudden urgency in every note from the outlying villages, as if the ink itself grew cold. Maester Conlon now wore 3 layers beneath his maester's chain. And even Arya, a wolf for any weather, tied a fur about her throat as she set off on her rounds each morning. The godswood lay blanketed in snow so thick, the carved face of the old heart tree was veiled, like a secret only the brave dared approach. But the people of the North were brave. The villages and circles had spent all autumn storing, gathering, mending, building not just walls but trust, habits, new ways of belonging. Now, as the sun barely crested the wall at midday, all that quiet labor began to pay out its dividend. On the eve of the first snowstorm, Sansa made her way to the hall, where a knot of stewards and farmers argued over the division of smoked meat from the new communal smokehouse. Her entrance was acknowledged, but she was not the center of the circle. The tall woman from Barrowton, who had lost her husband the winter before, spoke fiercely for her village, while the old fisherman from the White Knife insisted that the poorest households must receive more, or else risk another run of thefts in the night. The baker's apprentice, barely 15, offered a compromise. Every village take 1 extra share for every orphan child, and those with surplus next year pledge a double tithe in return. It was not Sansa who decided, but the circle itself, by hands and voices and the weight of old memory. Sansa watched the tally stones fall, heard the rough count, the grudging acceptance, the sudden laughter that followed as someone tossed a loaf into the air. She walked out into the snow with the quiet pride of a mother who sees her children grown. The first blizzard of winter came fast, hiding the moon and rattling the shutters. For 3 days, no one left the keep except the night watchman, whose rounds were marked by lanterns swinging like ghosts in the dark. Sansa stood with Arya at the highest tower, watching the snow swirl over the battlements. "I remember being afraid once," Sansa said, "of the darkness, of being alone." Arya grinned, hair silver with snow. "You're not alone now. Neither is the North." They shared a quiet, contented moment, shoulders touching, the storm howling all around. When at last the storm abated, the world was new. White, quiet, a silence broken only by the drip of icicles and the shouts of children freed to play. Arya led a team to clear the roads and rooftops. The work was hard, but spirits were high. Even the southern traders, caught by surprise in Winter Town, found themselves conscripted to shovel snow and Carrie kindling, grumbling in half a dozen accents, but laughing too, as they learned the art of warming stones for their boots. The hardship of the first snow drew people together. Meals were eaten in the great hall, with circle delegates serving as cooks and stewards. Songs were shared in the evenings, old dirges, new ballads about the Republic and its quiet victories. Sansa sang with them, her voice a steady thread, remembering her mother's lullabies, her father's stern songs of warning, all those memories now mingling with hope. News arrived from the far villages, carried by the new circuit riders the moot had authorized. Deepwood Mott had lost 3 roofs, but no lives. Bear Island's chief sent word of a narrow escape. 2 girls caught in a snowdrift, rescued by a wildling hunter who'd once been her bitterest rival. Every dispatch included not just hardship, but thanks for grain, salt, and tools sent from other towns. Each story was recorded and read aloud at the next council. Every struggle and every act of kindness counted as a victory. Not all was easy. A fever swept through a cluster of homes near the shivering sea, brought by a sick trader who'd arrived just before the storm. The circles convened by torchlight, sending healers and supplies, burning infected bedding in the snow, and establishing new rules for traders entering from the south. Quarantine, daily checks, honest reporting. Some bristled at the restrictions, but Sansa insisted. "We have chosen to trust each other," she said. "But trust does not mean blindness." Her firmness quelled dissent, and when the fever passed, no more than a handful had died. A tragedy, but far less than it might have been. That winter, the circles found themselves facing new questions. What to do with lawbreakers when the nearest gale was weeks away? And what to do with orphans whose families had been scattered by storm or plague? Arya led one debate in the hall, her boots muddy, her expression fierce. She argued for new homes, not just charity, families adopting those left behind, every circle pledging a roof for the lost. It was not an easy promise, but hands rose, one after another, and when the snow melted, every orphan child had a bed and a hearth, not in an institution, but in a home. More difficult were the lawbreakers. The first thefts were minor, a loaf here, a jug of oil there. But when a band of desperate men tried to rob the Wintertown armory, the circles had to decide: exile, punishment, or mercy. The debate raged for days. Sansa spoke softly but carried weight. "We are all tempted in the cold and the dark. But we are also more than our mistakes. Let us punish with justice, not vengeance. Let them earn their return by service, not by suffering." In the end, the thieves were put to work repairing the damaged walls and feeding the pigs. Watched closely but treated fairly. None tried to escape, and when the spring came, one asked to stay and become a circle scribe. The darkest night of winter brought a reminder that the old world had not vanished. News came from the Riverlands. A rebellion had failed, the lords reasserting their power with fire and blood. Refugees arrived at the border, shivering and hungry. The circle met in haste. Sansa's heart ached for them, but she knew the limits of her people's strength. Still, the vote was clear. The North would open its borders to those who swore to abide by circle law, no matter their name or history. The first to arrive were a family with nothing but their clothes and a single battered lute. By the end of the month, there were hundreds. Some villagers grumbled, but most remembered their own hard times, and the newcomers were given work, shelter, and a voice in the circle. The lute was soon heard at every evening meal, and its owner, once a lord's fool, taught the children new songs. Winter ended with a riot of thaw. Ice breaking in the rivers, snow shrinking into the earth, first green shoots nosing through the mud. The North had survived another year, not by luck, not by the wisdom of one, but by the stubborn, shared labor of all. As the great thaw gave way to new planting, Arya returned from the far reaches with a fresh band of free folk and 2 Riverlander families, all eager to claim land and start anew. She had lost weight but gained a certain peace, her eyes clearer than ever. Sansa met her at the gate, embracing her fiercely. "I missed you," she said, her voice thick. Arya only grinned. "Someone has to remind you not to become too much of a politician." Together, they toured the town. Sansa, listening to every small complaint, Arya joking with the guards, accepting a mug of cider from the brewer, who had once been her adversary. The children chased them down the muddy streets, shouting Arya's name, tugging at her cloak. The next moot convened in the green fields by the river, with banners snapping in the warming breeze and the grass soft underfoot. This time, the crowd was even larger. New faces from the south and west, old enemies now neighbors, each with their own accent and story. The day's agenda included reports from every village, proposals for a new bridge across the White Knife, and an ambitious plan for a network of healing houses staffed by apprentices trained in both Maester and Free Folk ways. Sansa opened the moot with few words, letting the people carry the day. The Bear Islanders spoke of new fisheries. The refugees from the Riverlands described the growing of unfamiliar crops and the blending of old traditions with new. Arya presided over a wrestling match between a Bear Island girl and a Free Folk boy, which ended with both in the river and the crowd in stitches. As evening fell, a gentle rain began to fall. But no one left. The circle's decisions were written on parchment and announced by torchlight. Songs were sung, and the river's voice mingled with human laughter. Sansa watched it all from the edge of the firelight, her heart full. Arya joined her, bumping shoulders. "The world keeps turning," she said. Sansa nodded. "And so do we." When the night was darkest, Sansa spoke with the Riverlander woman Melantha, now serving as a scribe. "You think this will last?" Melantha asked, half skeptical, half awed. Sansa looked out over the circle, the mingled banners, the faces lit by fire and hope. "It will last as long as we remember what we're building, and who we're building it for. As long as we let every voice count." In the months that followed, the Republic faced its share of new storms. Trade disputes, a late frost that killed half the apple crop, a mysterious fever that ran through White Harbor and left even the Maesters baffled. But each crisis met with the same stubborn, communal resolve. The North bent, but did not break. A year passed. The next winter was easier, the stores fuller, the people more sure of their own power. Sansa and Arya walked the halls and fields. Sisters, leaders, no longer icons but participants in a shared miracle. Old ghosts lingered in the corners, memories of crowns and betrayals and iron thrones. But the new stories, the ones whispered at bedtime and shouted at the moot, belonged to everyone. And in the long northern night, as the snows returned and the world seemed to shrink to firelight and song, the North endured, not because of the strength of any one person, but because they endured together, bound not by blood or fear, but by the simple, radical act of believing in each other. Ki-ha. The thaw broke suddenly that spring, a surge of warmth spilling through the valleys, sending the rivers roaring and the creeks leaping from their banks. Snow retreated to the high ridges in a single week, bearing dark loam and carpets of green moss, revealing what the long winter had preserved. The bones of deer beside the godswood, wagon wheels locked in ice, the tracks of children's games still etched on old drifts. As the first birds returned to the birches and the sun grew strong enough to warm the stones, the north stretched awake with 100 voices, hammers ringing, sheep bleating, traders calling out the price of barley. In Winterfell's market square, the first fair of the new season drew a crowd so thick Sansa could hardly move without her hand being taken by a neighbor or her arm seized by a new delegate eager to talk. Booths lined the lanes, affron and wool from White Harbor, smoked lampreys and brine from Deepwood Motte, baskets of cured pine nuts from the edge of the gift. Children ran in shrieking packs, bright ribbons trailing from their sleeves. Arya was among them, racing a free-folk girl barefoot through the puddles, her laughter cutting through the bustle. She tumbled to a halt, boots in hand, as Sansa approached. "Thought you'd be inside, holding court with the scribes." Arya grinned, cheeks flushed and hair wild. "There's more court to be held here," Sansa replied, and drew Arya into step beside her. They moved together past the weavers' stalls, accepting bites of sweet bread and cups of early cider. Everywhere they went, people called greetings. Sometimes to Sansa the consul, sometimes to Arya the roadkeeper, often simply to the Stark sisters who had led them through darkness and cold and into this green season. The mood was festive. but not without tension. That year's moot, the largest yet, would begin the following morning. Delegates from as far as Gulltown and the Neck had already arrived, their banners unfamiliar, their dialects strange. A handful of knights from the Vale watched the proceedings with sharp eyes, unused to seeing men and women from every walk of life voting as equals. Southern merchants, tented on the riverbank, bartered for timber and furs, quietly probing the Republic's seams for weakness or gold. Sansa felt the old order watching, searching for a crack in the new. As dusk fell and torches flickered over the fair, the sisters joined Maester Conlan for a walk along the castle ramparts. Below them, the market thinned, and the cooks and crafters began cleaning up, singing as they worked. Conlan passed Sansa a letter from Lady Royce in the Vale, its seal still warm from the courier's pocket. "She asks if we'll send more teachers to the mountain villages," Conlan reported. "Their circles want to read the law for themselves." Sansa smiled, folding the letter away. "We'll send what we can. No book, no word should be hoarded." Arya perched on the parapet, legs swinging. "If only the lords of the south believed as much." "They watch us now," Conlan mused. "Not with swords yet, but with questions." "They can ask," Arya said, eyes glinting. "But the answers won't be the ones they want." That night, as the torches burned down and the delegates crowded the new moot hall with its high open beams, Sansa sat long by the window, listening to the wind. She remembered her father's words about leadership, the weight, the patience, the necessity of listening twice before speaking once. But this was something new. Not one voice, but hundreds, and the truest power resting in the space between them. The morning of the moot dawned gray and misty, the kind of day that made every color stand out sharp against the dew. The hall filled early, bare islanders, wildlings, freeholders from the old castles, stewards from the rills, a cluster of ironborn, with salt-stiff cloaks and wary expressions. Scribes counted the voting stones as each delegation entered, recording names and villages, some familiar, some fresh. The Riverlands contingent was nearly doubled from last year. A Dorne banner snapped at the edge of the field, signaling the arrival of yet more guests. Sansa took her place not at a throne, but in the circle, a simple bench set among the others. Arya sat on her right, Maester Conlan at her left. The Bear Island chief, a young woman with fierce blue eyes and a habit of finishing every argument with a riddle, stood to open the moot. Her words were brisk, and laughter followed. The circle responded in kind, a sign of comfort, and the session began. The first question was trade. With the rivers running high and roads still mired in mud, how best to move spring's goods to the coast? A merchant from White Harbor proposed building a fleet of flat-bottomed boats to ply the new waterways, employing out-of-work carpenters and teaching young apprentices a new craft. A wildling woman with tattoos along her arms volunteered her clan's skills in binding green wood and shaping hulls. The vote was swift, unanimous, and the Carpenters Guild leader offered to oversee the project. Sansa nodded, heart lightened by the ease of accord. Next came the question of education. The Riverlands delegates, inspired by the North schoolhouses, requested a partnership to exchange teachers and send a handful of bright children south for a year. Arya, who had learned half her lessons in exile, spoke quietly in favor. Let them learn together, so that no one need fear what comes from across the border. The circle agreed, and a new program was born. The Children's Moot, a rotation of learning and sharing that would stretch from Skagos to Maidenpool. The hardest questions, as ever, were those of justice. A feud had sparked between two families, one free folk, one descended from an old noble house, over a disputed plot of land. Each told their story, each produced witnesses. It was clear both believed in their right, and neither would give way. Sansa listened as the circle debated, her mind turning over her father's old maxims and her mother's lessons in compassion. At length, Arya stood, hands in her pockets. "A blade splits what words can mend," she said. "Let the land be worked together, half and half, until 3 harvests pass. At each harvest, the yield is tallied, and the circle decides if either has wronged the other. If, after 3 years, they cannot find peace, the land goes to the children born since the feud. to be worked by them as they see fit. Murmurs ran through the hall, but the proposal was voted, and won. The families glared, but their anger was already draining into resignation. The law was new, but the peace would hold. As the moot adjourned for the midday meal, Sansa wandered among the tents, sharing bread and cheese, listening to gossip, promising to speak with the southern merchants about their tariffs. She stopped at a small table where a crippled man was teaching a group of children to carve letters into green wood. He offered her a try, and she obliged, scratching a careful S into the soft bark. The children laughed, and Sansa joined them, feeling the old distance between ruler and ruled vanish in the ordinary miracle of shared work. In the afternoon the rain came, light at first, then heavier, drumming on the hall's roof. Rather than scatter, the delegates huddled together, talking over mugs of hot spiced milk, sharing old jokes and songs from every corner of the realm. The Dorne woman sang of sand and stars. The Ironborn told a tale of a storm at sea, ending with the unlikely rescue of a drowning Septon by a mute fisherman. Each story brought laughter or tears. The moot resumed in the evening, decisions made by torchlight, the rain softening to a hush. Late that night, Arya and Sansa walked the wet ramparts together. "I never thought I'd see the day," Arya mused. "All those banners, all those faces, and not one lord shouting above the rest." "We are not done," Sansa said. "There will be more storms, more tests." "I hope so," Arya replied. "What's worth building that isn't worth fighting for?" Spring passed quickly. The new boats launched with ribbons and cheers. The first school children rode south, and the disputed land bore a crop heavier than any had expected. The southern merchants found the North's rules exacting but profitable. More came, some with honest intent, others seeking weakness and finding little. The Ironborn, once the North's terror, discovered a market for dried fish and seal oil, and a few even spoke of settling down, if the Circle would have them. Sansa found herself writing letters late into the night, her script careful but swift. She corresponded with Lady Royce, Melantha of the Riverlands, a dozen other women who led in their own corners of Westeros. She shared advice, warnings, encouragement. Some of these letters, she knew, would never be answered, but every page was a stone laid in the new foundation. Arya took to the roads, sometimes with a small band, sometimes alone. She traveled as far as the Neck, hunting with the crannogmen and trading stories for news. In White Harbor, she taught a group of orphans how to swim. In Barrowton, she spent a night tending the wounded after a barn fire. She sent Sansa news by every possible courier. Ravens, riders, a wandering bard who carried a poem for Sansa tucked in his boot. As midsummer neared, the North faced a drought. Crops withered, and tempers flared. The moot was called in haste. Some delegates argued for hoarding, others for rationing. The youngest among them suggested digging new wells and trading for southern grain. Sansa listened, then asked the free folk if their old ways offered any wisdom. An elder told of a moss that signaled water below, and teams fanned out, guided by his stories. By harvest, the North had survived again, not rich, but unbroken. The school children returned with tales of southern cities and new games, bringing with them bundles of foreign seeds and letters for their friends. The river routes, once choked with mud, were now the arteries of the realm, and news traveled faster than rumor. A southern merchant wrote a song about the North circles, and it was sung in inns as far as the Reach. The autumn moot convened with new delegates from the south, their eyes wide at the absence of thrones. This time, Sansa presided with Arya at her side, but she spoke less, letting the people argue, propose, compromise. A river captain from the Neck was voted in as the year's chief of road patrols, the first outsider to hold such a role. Arya grinned at the uproar. "Change is a circle too," she told Sansa later. And in winter, when the snow returned and the old anxieties tried to creep back in, the North was ready. The stores were full. The moot was swift. The people knew the cost of survival, and they shared it. The years blurred, as years do. But the story of the North's republic, of Sansa's wisdom and Arya's courage, of circles that bent but did not break, spread wider with each season. Children grew, old feuds faded, and every year new banners appeared in the field at Winterfell. The South watched, some with envy, some with scorn, some with the quiet hope that what had begun in the land of snow and wolves might one day take root everywhere. Sansa and Arya grew older, but never apart. In every council, every harvest, every winter's night, they stood together. And when, at last, the realm looked to the north not for conquest or for fear, but for the slow miracle of peace and shared purpose, the sisters looked at what they had made and saw that it was good. And in the years after, when strangers asked how the north had endured, how it had found its way out of darkness and into the season of circles, the answer was always the same: not by thrones, not by swords, but by hands joined and voices heard, and the simple, stubborn refusal to ever let winter win alone.